let's go ahead and get the show started here. Uh, so uh, we're going to go ahead and talk about accrual accounting. So a very fun subject for everyone. And we're going to go ahead and focus on some recommended accrual accounting reports and how those common reservation actions are going to go ahead and impact said reports. We're going to go ahead and have a couple hosts today, myself being one of them. My name is Josh. I work over here within the Learning Services and Implementation team, and I've been with RMS about 10 years. I'm joined by a colleague of mine, Dan here. He has been also with RMS for a little bit. How long have you been here at RMS, Dan?
Oh, I've been here just a little under 6 years, so catching right up to you, Josh.
Right, so a couple veterans per se on the call today. But we're going to go ahead and take a look at a few different areas. So let's go ahead and get the party started by talking a little bit about double entry accounting. And why we bring it up today is because RMS is kind of based off of this foundation that double entry accounting reporting being kind of the standardized method of recording every financial transaction within two different accounts. Think of it as each transaction being recorded in one ledger, there's going to be some sort of equal and opposite transaction to balance it in another. For example, we'll look at a couple scenarios today. One of the scenarios that we'll take a look at is when a payment is made in advance of someone's stay and how that credit or receipt is going to be balanced using some of the ledgers that we'll talk about on our Night Audit report. And we're going to go ahead and take a look at a few other reports today that will go ahead and focus on financial transactions within the system. Dan, what sort of other reports do you think we'll be discussing today outside the Night Audit report?
That is a fantastic question. Of course, we will be talking about the Night Audit report. Everybody will probably be sick of that by the time we're done with it. We'll also be looking at the cash transactions report, which is a really great report. Allows you to review all payments that have been taken or processed over a day or date range, and a lot of really great filtering options with that report as well. We'll also be looking at our debtors ledger report. Now, the debtors ledger report is a fantastic tool. It allows you to see different reservation accounts and if they're in a debit or credit status. So if they owe you money or they have maybe an advance deposit on that account. And we'll also be looking at the audit trail report. The audit trail report allows us to see a detailed information on the revenue postings for a given day or date range, and that's also going to be broken up by GL account code. So we're going to be talking a lot about these reports today in some pretty good detail, showing you how they work. And by the end of today, what we're hoping you'll be able to get out of this is, being able to easily find payments or receipts that are entered into RMS, either in through the Night Audit report in the cash analysis section, and match it to the cash transactions report. Recognize the difference between a liability and an asset on the Night Audit report. Be able to see those opening and closing balances and where we can match those on the debtors ledger. How to utilize the Night Audit report to determine your revenue and taxable liability, and understanding the expected movement of income based on those reservations. So a lot of really great stuff. And with that, why don't we jump right in? Josh, do you want to walk us through a couple examples?
Yeah, let's do it. That's why everyone's here, right?
Exactly.
So we'll go ahead and take a look at a couple scenarios, like I mentioned a little bit earlier. And the first scenario that we'll go ahead and take a look at will be geared around money taken prior to any charges. So for that purpose, we've created a reservation already. Could you pull up reservation number 638, Dan?
638, coming right up.
All right, so you can see that this reservation is currently in the arrived status. But what we did with this reservation is we made it in the past, obviously, and checked it in. So all of these different reports that we'll go ahead and focus on will be done kind of already. As you can see, this reservation was made. If we look over to the right, there was a deposit request on the date it was made of $334.39. So on that day, we made a payment, $334.39. If you go ahead and jump over to the folio for me, Dan, we'll go ahead and just take a look at what that might look like, on the account. So if we look at that top line item that Dan has highlighted in green, it is a payment with the accounting date of July 16th. You can see it was a credit card payment in the amount of $334.39 to match that deposit request. Now, generally, when we have payments made prior to any charges, you're going to go ahead and see the movement on our night audit report. And the best way to go ahead and look at it is to actually pull that up. So Dan, if you would, you can go ahead and exit this real quickly and we'll go ahead and pull up the night audit report. And you can see Dan searching for the night audit report, and he is going to go ahead and show a quick little tip, if you don't already know, how to run RMS in more than one tab. So you can have this reservation open while also opening up some report or another reservation if you need. And the night audit build screen is fairly simple, not too many options here, but what we'll do is we're going to run it for the 16th of July. So just the one day. And if you wanted to, again, this is a multi-day report if you needed to run it over a date range, but we'll just look at one day to focus in on this detail behind the payment. If you are a multi-property database, you want to make sure you're selecting the correct property. In this case, we use the resort and spa property. And if you're not a multi-property, you probably don't have that option. A little bit ago, there was an option to either include or exclude the statistical analysis. There is an option that is defaulted as unchecked for that show statistics analysis, but if you want to, you can always add that back in if you prefer to see it. We'll just build it like it is here, pretty simple. And it's going to go ahead and open up in this next little report screen. And what we're going to go ahead and get is a multi-page report that's going to go ahead and detail all the different transactions that occurred within the day. And the idea is that this night audit report is going to break up this top section that we'll take a look at, the cash transactions area, for all payments, not just cash. You can see that we do have a few different entries in here, one of them being the credit cards for $334.39. So a pretty similar number to what we saw on that reservation we just looked at. If you can see, there's also going to be a section for refunds, if there were any refunds done, as well as any other payment types that might have been taken within the day. Now, anytime that we have money taken in before charges, the balancing any account as of the day that you're running this report that's in a credit due to maybe a deposit payment, like we saw in that example, a payment made prior to their arrival. Or maybe it's going to be an overpayment, which could be the case with this example, which we'll take a look kind of in the second half of the scenario. But the idea is that since the money came in and did not immediately exit, we would see an entry within the plus new credits. Now, if you notice, there's some other activity in there, less credits used, less credits refunded. And the idea is this is going to be the activity of the day that was seen. And this is just going to balance all of the different entries, whether it's a payment that came in and maybe even credits that were created. So Dan will show us a little bit more of this in his scenarios a little bit later. But there's going to be an opening and closing balance to this advances ledger that we'll go ahead and focus on. And the specific entry here that we'll look at is the closing balance of $334.39. And then we have one single account. This could be made up of multiple different accounts. We'll show you here in a minute a very nice report that will detail the opening balance and the closing balance and every single account that makes up the number that we're seeing there. If we scroll down a little bit, we're going to find our guest ledger. I'm going to leave that to Dan to talk to a little bit later in his scenarios. But we're going to go down through the second page as well, where you'll see the charge analysis section. Within the charge analysis section is where you can expect to see the different charge postings summarized by general ledger account code. This might be nightly revenue. These could be incidentals, resort fees or cleaning fees, or maybe other types of sales, liquor sales, food and beverage, etc. This can also be tax. And we can see this here on this report. That won't really be too pertinent in our scenario that we just took a payment because there were no charges applicable for the 16th of July here. We'll talk more to this in a little bit. So the third page, sometimes more than the third page, but in our example, it's the third page, you'll find the cash analysis. And this is going to be comprised of all of the transactions that were taken in over the day or the date range. And this will be broken up by payment type, receipt type, however you want to think of it. If you do have credit cards, this will all be broken out by credit card types, which if anyone has looked at this report, or maybe what we'll talk about in a second, the cash transaction report, you've probably seen similar. You'll be able to see the reservations it was applicable to, the amount, as well as the user or staff member that might have taken that payment. You'll see refunds separate from payments as well on this report, even though in maybe the financial interface, which this report does balance to, maybe that'll all be summarized as one payment type. But the idea is that there's always going to be a matching report to this night audit. Since it's a very powerful report, it does display a lot here, and it is very important since it is the one that balances to your financial interface. We want to make sure that this is the right information. So if we ever want to go through and make sure that we're seeing the correct stuff and there's nothing erroneous that's occurred within the day, we're going to go ahead and take a look at a balancing report to this cash analysis. It's called our cash transaction report. And Dan's going to pull that up and open it in a new tab just so that we can go ahead and compare. And as long as we're building these reports that we'll be discussing today within the same day or date range that you're building the Night Audit report, they should always match. So if we go ahead and build this just for the 16th of July, and we go ahead and focus just on that resort and spa property. If you wanted to at this point too, this is the opportunity to filter by user. If you wanted to just look at a specific user and their transactions or payments that were done over that day or date range. The online system, the internet booking engine, is also a user in case you were curious. There's a lot of options here, but we won't mess too much with those. We'll just go ahead and click build. All right, so it looks pretty similar to the cash analysis section of that Night Audit report. You'll notice that it also has some interactive abilities where you have the account number and the reservation number highlighted. So you'll be able to go directly to those if you needed to. So this is a report that will go ahead and make sure that the two reports are in line. If you're ever to find something on the cash transaction but wasn't on the Night Audit report, maybe something to investigate a little further. Now, we talked about the advances ledger and that debtor analysis section a little bit. So the report that we're going to go ahead and talk about next is going to focus specifically on matching up that closing and opening balance, and it's called our Debtors Ledger Report. You can find it in the Reports Accounting menu, and you can search for it like Dan has done here. If, for whatever reason, you don't see these reports when you're logged into the system, just make sure that you check with your system administrator and get those reports visible on your security profile. Just like the Night Audit report, we're going to go ahead and build this as of a certain day. So let's just go ahead and build it as the 16th, just like we did before, and we'll just focus on that same property, resort and spa. Now, before we go ahead and click the build button, there's one other dropdown that we'll go ahead and focus on. It's going to be towards the bottom of this build screen, and it's the credit and debit dropdown. Yep. And if you leave it as all, it will show both the advances ledger and the guest ledger entries. But if we just want to focus on one or the other, this is where we have the opportunity to switch it to maybe just credit like we'll do now. There's a few other options there. We won't detail too much about this, but with all of these options with this Debtors Ledger report or any of these other reports, there's a lot of information on our Help Center to give you more information on what these tick boxes will do for you. Go ahead and click Build. Thank you, Dan. All right. So as of the 16th of July, we have a credit balance, $334.39. And if you remember, this is the same number that we had in our Night Audit report as the closing balance for the 16th of July. Now, if you were to run this for some other day, for instance, if you ran this for the 15th of July, that would have been the opening balance for that night audit on the 16th of July. So just depending on what you want to pull, either the opening or closing balance, just be cognizant of the as of date you're building this debtors ledger report and which one you're going to go ahead and try and match up. And much like our cash transaction or the cash analysis section, you can see that this debtors ledger report is also interactive. So if there was something wrong with that, we can go directly to that account or the reservation and correct it if we needed to. All right, so that's going to be scenario one, payment made prior to any charges, similar to an advance deposit at the time of booking. Now, before we jump into the second scenario, everyone should see a raise hand option within their Teams menu. And we'll just take a quick poll. And if you could, using that raise hand option, is anyone here utilizing the night audit report on a nightly, daily basis to go ahead and balance their financial system or just make sure that everything is in check with all of the daily transactions that have occurred within the day? Perfect. Looks like there's quite a few that do use this report, so it is a good one to use. So it is something that we'll recommend along with the debtors ledger cash transaction. And in just a little bit here, we'll talk about that audit trail report here. All right. So if you would for me, Dan, we're going to go ahead and jump back over to that reservation we had, it's reservation number 638. And if you would, let's open up that reservation account or folio as it's called here in our database. All right. So on the 17th of July, we checked this reservation in. And the rule is the remaining balance is due upon arrival. So what was done is the payment was processed $334.39 in cash on the 17th prior to the reservation checking in. It's important to note the order in which these transactions occur because the balancing action of that double entry accounting will be seen in maybe a different ledger depending on the order in which the charges or the payments process. Now, in this example, we have posted charges within the same day. And charges are going to be those black entries, nightly rate for that night that they stayed, along with any taxes, resort fees, et cetera, that could be pertinent for this reservation. And at the end of July 17th, we have a credit balance, if you notice, $331.89. You can see the CR there. That's how we know it's still in credit. And that's due to the overpayment this reservation had per se, because of the full balance being paid at the time of arrival or prior to arrival. So the entry within the night audit report is going to look a little bit different, but somewhat similar in some sense. So let's go ahead and jump over to that night audit report one more time. And we're going to go ahead and take a look at building this for the 17th, the check-in day, where we took the remaining balance due and posted those charges. All right. Now, in this example here, we've got our cash transaction section. So the cash transaction section that we show there shows a cash entry of $334.39. Similar number to what we just talked about. No other payments, so pretty clear to tell what's occurred today. Now, since that money came in prior to the charge posting before the check-in action, the balancing entry for the double entry accounting is still in the advances ledger, just like our first scenario where the money came in as a new credit. And you see the opening balance, $334.39. That was the same number that we had on our debtors ledger we looked at just a second ago. And for the 17th, we added an additional $334.39 to that. But within the same day, we used a portion of that, let's say, credit or liability, and it was basically posted as revenue. We don't exactly know what, but the 336.89, along with some of the entries you see there in the guest ledger as plus new reservation charges are going to be detailed within the charge analysis section. So if we scroll down to that second page we haven't talked too much about, we get to see all of the charges that were posted over the day or the date range, and this will be summarized by GL account code. This could be a single transaction, this could be multiple transactions. We don't exactly know here on this report, but the idea is we want to make sure that this number is correct. And there's a couple different ways you can check it. Dan will show you a way you can go directly from this night audit report using the interactive option. I'm going to show you how we can use the audit trail report to go ahead and detail the transactions that make up these different general ledger account codes, just to make sure that there's nothing erroneous in our postings, the amounts aren't incorrect. We can go ahead and pull one other report if you want to go ahead and pull up the audit trail report. That's another one that can be found underneath our accounting reports, and you'll see it there. And we're going to go ahead and, similar to the other reports we talked about, we're going to build this for the same day or date range. And we'll just look at the 17th of July here for our example. And we'll just go ahead and leave it by posting date, and we're going to select the resort and spa property. Before we build it though, just because I feel it's a little easier on the eyes, there's a group by option just underneath the GL. Yep. And if you want to change that to GL code, it allows us to see the totals and the summaries a little bit easier. So just go ahead and build this. All right. Now, if you notice here, not a whole bunch, but we do get to see the payment up at the top of the audit trail report, and then the different sort of GL account codes that were utilized within the day. And you'll notice this is made up of a couple different reservations, a couple different accounts for these different county, occupancy, state taxes, etc., as well as the nightly revenue. And the one in particular there for reservation number 638, Sarah Smith, that's the amount that we would have seen posted on the reservation folio, $299, in addition to those other taxes. And if anything's wrong or incorrect here, this is an interactive report that allows you to go directly to the reservation or directly to the account to correct it, or at least see what occurred within it to make sure that it is indeed correct. So this report, the audit trail, is a good one to go ahead and make sure that all of the individual transactions that make up that number you see in the charge analysis section of the night audit report are indeed correct. And if not, you at least know the transactions that make up and you can action them. All right. So if we hop back over to the night audit report, Dan, and we scroll down to the third page, this is where we get to see the payment that was made. And again, if you wanted to see the cash transaction report, build it for the 17th, we'll see the same transactions. Now, something we will take a look at, since we won't take a look at the cash transaction report again this time, we'll take a look at the debtors ledger report one more time, and I'd like you to build it for the 17th. Perfect. Still build it as a credit, because we want to kind of verify some of the activity within the advances ledger. We're looking to grab the closing balance, make sure it matches. And if you remember the number 331.89 from the night audit report, closing balance for the 17th, it's the same one we see here for the 17th. And again, it's the reservation that we're using in our example, because at this point, technically they've overpaid, and there's at least one more night expected to post to take that 331.89 credit and move it into some revenue and tax code that we would expect to see on the charge analysis for maybe the 18th, which would be another night that they're staying. All right, so before I let Dan talk a little bit, we'll go ahead and do one more quick poll. And by, again, show of hands, we haven't really talked about it much, but is anyone scheduling these night audit report, debtor ledger, cash transactions, any of the above, so that they get hit your email inbox on a regular frequency that you guys get to set?
Looks like we got a
Excellent.
fair amount of people.
Yeah. And schedule report's great because it allows you to build the report the same way every time. in case you do alter the build screen options in some fashion. They can get delivered to your inbox, and if someone doesn't log into the system a lot, it's always nice to go through and send them a report so that they don't have to be expected to log into the system, maybe do the two-factor authentication, and then go through and build the report, export the report, or print the report, etc., when it can just hit their email inbox whenever they need it. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dan, and he's going to give you the opposite side of the coin.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. That was a lot of really helpful information. Like he said, we're going to look at a couple other options here. And I too have a reservation example set up for us. I'm going to go over to reservation 639. And we see we have this guest here who has departed already. They checked out today on the 18th. And if we look at their folio, this property takes payment at checkout. There's no advance deposit, maybe an authorization at check-in, but we take that final payment at checkout. So as we look at this folio, we see the nightly rates had already posted previously. When it comes to today's date, we do have this charge for a bottle of champagne, as well as our final payment of $919.08. So why don't we jump into everybody's gonna guess it, night audit report, and we'll see how this affects that report. I'll go ahead and I'm just gonna go ahead and run this for today's date. I'm gonna use my pre-selected option up there, and we'll go ahead and build this report just as is. So as we look at through our night audit report, of course, we see our cash transaction section showing our $919 payment. And as we move down, we're not seeing anything in the advances ledger because charges had already been applied to the account when that payment was taken. But we do see that value here in the guest ledger or in-house ledger for the less paid balances. This is showing that we've paid off any charges on that reservation already. As we look to our charge analysis, we will see a charge here in our liquor sales for that bottle of champagne. And we will see our payment here in the cash analysis section on page 3 for that same amount. If we look to our other reports we've been talking about today, like our cash transactions report. Whoops, I opened the wrong one. Our cash transactions report. We'll go ahead and run this again for today.
Probably the disclaimer, multiple tabs, right? Sometimes you hit the wrong one when.
Yeah. Know where you're clicking. So as we look here to the cash transactions report run for today, the 18th, we'll see that same amount balancing out to the cash analysis section. Pretty straightforward. And then also if we look to our debtors ledger, we're going to see some interesting stuff happen. So for this first part of this, I'll run it actually for yesterday, the 17th, but I'm going to change this from credit to debit because there are charges on the account that need to be paid off as of the 17th. So if we go ahead and build that report, we'll see that reservation here with the balance at that time as of the 17th, showing for $646.58. Now, the next day, that bottle of champagne would be posted and that payment would be taken. And if we run this report again for today's date, we'll actually see that reservation has been removed from the report. So because there is no longer a balance on the reservation, it won't show on this report because we're only looking to either credit or debit balances here with the debtors ledger. Now, we talked a lot about things that have happened and how they affect as they're happening. What about things that happen and affect charges in the past? maybe we need to get rid of a charge or provide a discount after the guest has already stayed. Well, to take a look at that, we're going to use this same reservation. They checked out today and maybe they've left and they're looking over their bill and they realize, hey, I did not buy this bottle of champagne. Why was this charged to my account? We look into it, we discover that it was a mistake. We want to make sure it's corrected. So we're going to take this off of their account. And the way I'm going to do that here is I'm going to void off this charge. So to void, I'm going to simply right click and choose void transaction. It'll ask me for a reason. I'll choose the most appropriate one and void transaction. As I void this transaction off, you'll see it has been removed from the view of the folio. And we're now sitting with a $272.50 credit balance, meaning we have money that the guest has paid that has not paid off a charge. Now, on top of this, because this is a return guest, they're very loyal, they come stay with us all the time, we want to make sure they feel taken care of, even though we did make a mistake. So we're going to offer them a little bit of a discount on their stay, take a little bit off of the last night they were here with us. And to do that, I'm going to use a credit note sundry or extras charge. I'll click my option for extras charge. Like I said, it may be called sundry in your database. And I'm going to go ahead and choose our credit note, which is going to be our guest satisfaction credit. We do know this is a credit note because it's in purple. Credit notes will always be in purple. And this specific credit note is what we refer to as an assigned credit note, meaning we actually apply this to a specific charge and it will target the GL account code of that charge when it posts this negative revenue. So I'm going to choose from my charge dropdown and I'll go ahead and choose last night's rate. We can see behind that this was a $289 rate. So maybe I'm going to give them $100 off. Not quite 50%, but almost. I'll enter my negative 100 and I will apply an exit. We'll see that charge has posted as of today, the 18th. We see our credit note for the $100. We also see the subsequent taxes, and that is one of the benefits of using an assigned credit note. When you target a charge that does have taxes, it will also reduce the value of those taxes appropriately. So no math involved in that one. But after we've done that, we do see that we have an additional a raise in our credit balance. We have some more money that we need to give back to the guest. We always want to get this back to a $0 balance. So for this, I'll go ahead and process a refund. My refundable amount is $383.50. And for this example, maybe we wrote them a check. Maybe that's our policy here. And I'll go ahead and process this refund, bringing us back down to a $0 balance. Now, before we look at some reports, I just want to kind of give out some information. I just did two different methods of removing charges or freeing up some credit on an account. I used a void option, and then I used that credit note. And the reasons we may use one versus the other, a big piece of that would be guest visibility. In this situation, that bottle of champagne didn't need to be on this guest bill. They didn't need to see it. We just needed to remove it. That's why I chose to void that transaction, because it's no longer displayed on their account. It does still live in the back end on our reporting, but the guest doesn't see it on their folio. Now, when it came to the discount of that last night they stayed with us, I wanted them to see that we've given them a discount. So we use that credit note. It'll display that negative value here, or that credit value. So just a couple different ways we can handle different needs. But let's take a look at our reports. Of course, we're going to go straight to that night audit first, and I'll just go ahead and run this again for today. We've made some changes, so we want to rerun it. As we look through the report, we see we still have that initial payment of $919.08 that we had taken. We did take that payment. That never changes once it's happened. It has happened. But we also now see our refunded amount here in the refund section. So we see that $383.50. As we move through the advances ledger, we'll actually see this amount displayed as plus new credits. So because we removed the charges that it had paid off, it now became new credit. So it's sitting in the advances ledger waiting for charges. But that will then balance out with our less credits refunded that we see here to balance everything out to zero, so that the two sides of that accounting that Josh spoke about in the very beginning. As we move down, we can take a look at our charge analysis, where we're going to see some fun, interesting things. Now, that bottle of champagne was attached to our liquor sales GL account code. And if we look at that here, we see, whoops, on the wrong one, we see that's currently showing as zero. We know that there have been transactions. So if I open this up, which allows us to see that more detailed information of what makes up these values, we're able to see the original charge of $250 and that voided off charge. So we can actually see that it was a void here. Bring us back down to that zero balance as they did balance each other out. Again, the two sides of the accounting. Everything gets balanced out. We can jump back to the main page of the Night Audit report. And again, if we go down to our cash analysis section, we'll see in addition to our payment, we have our refund. A couple of things we'll take a look at will be our cash transactions report. Of course, this is going to balance out to our cash section at the bottom of the Night Audit report. Here we have that. We see our initial payment again, as well as our refund. And we're not going to look at the debtors ledger because that's going to stay the same. At this stage, the guest still has a zero balance, so they still won't be showing on that report. But I know this has been a lot of information that you guys have taken in today, but it's all really, really powerful knowledge to have. But with that being said, Josh, what do you think about us jumping back to our presentation and going over a few pieces of information about these reports just to kind of round out our day?
Sounds like a good idea. Let's hop back over there and wrap up the webinar.
All right.
All right, so we talked quite a bit today about the Night Audit report. So the Night Audit report, as we've seen before, it's a single day report or it's a multi-day report if you choose to run it. We focused mainly on the single day variety. And it's important whether or not you do an automated or a manual Night Audit procedure. And the idea is that if you would like, you can get this report scheduled to you. If you use the automated variety, if you have someone that does the procedure for you, this will prompt up for them to print at the end of the evening, as well as the debtors ledger report. Those can be saved if you don't want to print them as well. And it's probably the most informative single day report that we've got within the system. And since it is the one that's going to balance to your financial interface, if you do have one, QuickBooks, M3, etc., this would be the report that I would expect to balance to it. So you get to see that ledger movement as well as any sort of charge posting, revenue, taxes, as well as the money in the door. So it is a very powerful report. Dan, from matching to the cash analysis, what report is we talk about a little bit earlier there that we'll go ahead and match up to that?
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned money in the door, and what better way to segue to money in the door or to the cash transaction report than saying money in the door? Cash transaction report is going to be a breakdown of all payments that you have received over a day or date range. It'll show every payment broken down by payment type. We'll see those refunds. And when it comes to credit cards, you'll actually see it broken down by the different credit card types, Visa, MasterCard, etc. You can also filter out this report in a lot of really useful ways. For example, if you just want to look at a specific payment type, you can filter those out. And we can also look to just specific users. So I think I mentioned this in the beginning today. If your property does accept cash and at the end of every shift, the front office team does that cash drop, they can filter this out by their own user, maybe even select just cash or check, and see what that drop should be, and they can compare to what they actually have. Takes a lot of the guesswork out of those kind of reports. And of course, we can also see what's being processed through online reservations by filtering out to that RMS online user. Now, we've taken cash, we posted charges, and reservations are going to have balances. That leads us to our debtors ledger report. The debtors ledger report is a super useful report that allows you to see those accounts and what their current balance is as of a specific date. Maybe in a debit state, maybe in a credit state. We can look at those separately. We can look at them all at once based on your needs. It's a really powerful tool that allows you to see what your liabilities are and what your assets are. And of course, this is going to balance out to your opening and closing balances on your night audit report. So another really fantastic way to make sure everything's lining up correctly. Josh, you want to tell us a little bit about the audit trail report?
Yeah, let's wrap it up. This will be the last one that we looked at today, and it's going to be the one that's going to kind of match the charge analysis that we see on that second page. So it's going to show the summary, and the audit trail report is going to show the detail behind that summary. It can be built on either a posting date or creation date option. For the accrual accounting, I'd always recommend the posting date. That'll be tied to the accounting date. If you do it by creation date, if charges were ever posted in advance of their stay, but the accounting date was in the future, the creation date would detail that. But the general idea is that the audit trail report details the summary of the numbers you're seeing broken out by GL account code. And a good way to build that is by grouping it by general ledger account code, a little bit easier to see and match up to that night audit charge analysis section. And as always, if you ever need any assistance or questions on these reports, there's a wealth of information in our help center, specifically on the night audit report. If you search the night audit report breakdown, you'll probably find a couple articles that will, if you need it, detail everything that we talked about, as well as some of the different options you need to go ahead and take a look at and matching reports and so forth to those different areas. So take a look at the help center. And if you do have additional questions, we always have our support team at your fingertips. And if you need any additional training, our training team as well is always available. So how much time we got, Dan? We got a few more minutes.
Oh, we got a few minutes. If anybody's got any questions, happy to get those answered.
Yeah, definitely. If you want to throw those into the chat, we can go ahead and do our best to answer them. And if we don't get them answered, we can always go ahead and try and point you in the direction of the support team, and they can try and assist with anything that you got. So just throw those into the chat, like Dan said, if you have anything. And looks like there's one from a little bit earlier about canceled invoices showing up on the reports and it messing up some of the tax liability that reports that they're pulling. We probably need to see a little bit more information on what exactly you're referring to, build screen options and so forth examples. So if you haven't already, I recommend logging a ticket with our support team, and then someone can get back with you, because the general idea is if you post a charge, it's going to be seen on that day within those reports we talked about. If later on down the road, for whatever reason, those charges get canceled or voided, kind of like Dan showed in the corrections, the negative action would be seen on the day in which you perform those voids. and they would balance each other out, but it may not be within the same month, obviously not the same day. So we don't go back in time and rewrite any historical reports. So if you do have any problems, if you void them same day, you wouldn't see them within any of the values. But if they were posted in the historical date, they would show on the historical date and always will, because we don't go back and adjust those historical dates. Only the day in which you're making those adjustments.
Great answer.
What about if someone did not want to allow those sorts of correction actions you talked about, Dan? Let's say it was too much power to give the front office staff. Is there ways to restrict the void transaction or refund options from certain people?
Absolutely. Absolutely. All of those actions that I showcase on correcting those are controllable by security profile. So if there are team members that you don't want having that power, maybe it is, like you said, too much power to wield, you can always remove that from a security profile. We have a lot of great customization in those. So yeah, check out your security profiles, or on the flip side, maybe they don't have access to and you want them to. You can always just switch it there in the profile as well.
Excellent. Well, doesn't look like we had too much more come in. If anything does come up, feel free to put it in the chat. And if not, we'll give everyone back their time. I'm sure everyone's busy with it being midsummer. And we'll just go ahead and thank you for joining and taking the time to listen to us ramble on about accounting. And we look forward to seeing you next time along our training webinar series.
Thanks, everybody. I hope this was helpful. And if you do think of any questions after the fact, feel free to always contact our support team or your account manager. They're all always here to help.